I am the chess strategist, and today we're going to win another chess game. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of our chess speedrun. Today we are going to be playing another 10 plus 5 rapid game. And in our last game, we had a symmetrical London that did not go well for our opponent. We were able to have a smooth win, and it was a pretty interesting game with a lot of points to analyze. And today I'm hoping we get another game where we have a similar result. So let's just get right into it. And I have been thinking up some new ideas for chess content recently. I've been putting out shorts or a speedrun video every single day, and I intend to continue with that, the daily content. And yeah, it's been really fun making videos in the past few weeks, especially. So yeah, we are playing against Nico 25 mates, and Nico starts off with d4, and we are going to be playing knight f6 in this game. Want to go for the Indian defense, which starts with knight f6. There's a few different ways you can play this variation. Our opponent goes for knight f3, and we are going to play 6 here. Start of a few different openings. And our opponent has played c4, the traditional move. We are going to play bishop to g7, and we are going to see what our opponent is going for here. Okay, and our opponent has played knight c3, and I think today is the game we are going to my favorite opening in all of chess that I love to play and I've studied a lot, and that is the Grunfeld Defense. And the Grunfeld Defense is a very aggressive opening with the black pieces against d4, and we're not playing it through the traditional move order, but here, if we play 5, we do transpose to a variation of the Grunfeld, and that's what we're going to do. 5 here. The idea is you want to strike in the center immediately, and bishop pressure white's center. So white is going to play e4 wow, okay, so our opponent has decided to actually give us a free pawn here. Kind of interesting. Yeah, I don't think our opponent is counting the attackers and defenders properly here. But yes, e4 is a hanging pawn. It is attacked twice and once. So, yeah, I think let's start with that. First thing we're going to do is going to play takes e4. And our opponent is going to drop back his knight. Fine with me. And let's just... Now, if our opponent takes with one of these knights, we take. And we're going to have an attack on the pawn here. So we're actually not really concerned about knights taking. Yes, we've won a pawn. They're going to get it back, but we're going to be able to win the central pawn back well. So I'm not super concerned about any of this. I'm thinking simplify here. Also, we can pawn in the center here. Start to take pawn in the center. What is our opponent? Like any discovered attack could really risk to us. What we're going to do is going to take pawn in the center, adding another defense to this pawn. Right. And yes, he's built the attack on our queen first. Changing queen also comes with check. And he trades back with the knight, and we now win this knight. And yeah, our opponent is really losing the plot here. Alright, and notice the strengths in our position. First thing we can do, we have his bishop that is creating pressure on the pawn. His knight is defending that pawn temporarily, but we have this bishop now just threatening the pawn whole game. Developing here. one move that we want to avoid is something like bishop g4 because it can be met with f3. So I'm thinking developing our knight might be a good move. Go for that. Develop our knight to c6. All our pieces into the game. And one of our next moves might be bishop 6, where the bishop is creating some pressure. Right, and we can defend our knight. Well, let's see. We want to make sure the move, which has been an idea in a lot of positions, doesn't come with. So, also this f4 or f5 move does that appealing, doubling our pawns. Advantage. I'm liking this. Dropping our knight back, creating another attacker on the pawn here. Maybe forcing this pawn to advance even further. To a square where it's going to be blockaded. Target. Now we're going to look to exchange. Now notice we are up a full knight. So up a full knight, what you want to do, change pieces. Changing pieces is incredibly important when up just left with the extra knight, it's going to hurt that position. Right? Our opponent has dropped his bishop back. He does not want to change pieces. And I understand why. He is down material and you down material. Now we could castle long here and get our rook into the immediately. But I feel like the position isn't urgent. We have excellently. We don't need to push hard. Give our opponent unnecessary counterplay like this wild, which he start pushing on forward. I'm just gonna castle to the side. We have a very safe position because of this fianchetto bishop. And this fianchetto bishop is our strongest piece by far. Right, and our opponent has decided to advance his pawn, which does make it a weak attack. Now, let's see. Knight want to go. Well, it dropped back to one of the squares, but that's not good. Knight cannot go to b5. Knight cannot really go to b4. So our main option, I think e4 is a nice square. For now, go right back to f6 if we. And we're also putting an attacker on this pawn, so this slightly. And our next plan is going to be very simple. We want to put rooks on the file, and we want to try to invade 7th rank. Alright, and our opponent has played f3, and we're just going to drop our knight back. Best place for our knight, well, really only one place our knight can do that, and play knight to d5 now. It is going to have a little bit more impact. We are going to be, well, not restricted by this pawn on c4 now, and we're going to get a tempo on this. So I'm thinking, alright, and opponent has developed his rook. They're going to go with the aforementioned knight to d5. Notice he has to move his bishop because if we were to take, he can take this trade, but we will be winning the pawn here. He's going to have to move his bishop. Sure. We'll see where he puts his bishop. Again, gaining the bishop pair would be an incredible advantage here for us. We've already got an extra knight, an extra bishop. Just marvelous in this. We've already got these two excellently placed bishops, slicing the board in half, basically. Alright, and here our opponent decides to go with g4. Now, here's where we calculate. Notice if we take this bishop, our opponent rook will be hanged. So what we can do is take the bishop, and if he takes our bishop, we take the rook, and we're going to be up exchange at least. So can do is that. I also like if he takes here, he takes with a knight, and then we drop our bishop back, and both these pawns are hanging, and have to defend both of them. I think I'm gonna go with that. First, we're gonna exchange for the bishop. Okay, and he decides to take with the knight, as he should, and we're gonna drop our bishop back, putting an attack on this pawn. And he should play b3 here. b3 does defend. Now that there's nothing on the diagonal, b3 is not a dangerous play. And follow-ups after b3, well, there's a few. We have this nice pin. Alright, our opponent decides to ignore b3. And doesn't play that move. Let's go for a different move. I guess aiming to wrap our light square bishop. But our light square bishop really is not in that much danger. Wants to play this, takes here, but our bishop can just drop back. It's not really a big deal. Our bishop can go forward as well. Wherever, take a pawn. Yeah, I'm not really sure what our opponent is planning here. Kind of seems odd. Well, one thing we can do is go for this move here. Jump our bishop into the center of the board. Notice that if he does play this move here, when the knights and then a rook, so it's really just our opponent is scraping the bottom of the barrel here to try to come up with something. This bishop d4 move is really just sinks the nail into the coffin for our opponent. And let's see what the response is going to be. Alright, and our opponent steps the king forward. And we are going to go for here. Winning a pawn. Now, trading for the knight would not be the end of the world. And we might just let it happen. First thing I want to do, though, is support our bishop with the rook. Pre-move this capture here. If our opponent is to take, change their bishop for our knight. Alright, and our opponent slides his king over. Rather oddly, in my opinion. And we are going to double rooks on the open file. Here I'm just trying to make moves quickly. We are getting a little bit low on time. I would like to maintain the time advantage that we have. Alright, and here our opponent has decided to move their knights from the attack of the bishop, which I guess is fine. Kind of still a rather odd move. First thing I'm noticing is that we can just here. So first thing we're going to do is exchange this bishop for the knight. That's going to come with check. Opponent has to take with rook. Then we're going to be able to win pawn over here. And is there any other better move? Not really, no. Notice this next move, rook to d8, is going to come with a lot of threatening to invade. Okay, and our opponent doubles our pawns. Fine. Now, rook to d8 is a nice move. We also have rook to a8, where we can start pushing the outside pass pawn. There's a lot of different moves here. I'm thinking we should drop our bishop back all the way, control this file, and notice that our bishop is going to control this a1 square for the rest of the game, and pushing this pawn is going to be the main plan that we have. Right. Let's get our rook behind the pass pawn. And then the next move we might go for is rook to d4, threatening a trade here. That would be completely game-ending for our opponent. If he's forced to make this trade, it's just going to be bishop and rook versus rook, and we're going to still have 3 extra pawns. So, yes, this is a dangerous move for my opponent to deal with. He decides to go for the rook trade, but on his own terms instead of ours, which is understandable. But it still is a lost position for our opponent because of the lack of material. Okay, and our opponent decides going to blockade our pawns. And now, time that we are going to start getting our pieces more active. We want to make sure our bishop's in place. We want to start winning some pawns. And this pawn here is not going to be the vehicle from which we win, but it is going to be kind of distraction. This king has to get over here if he wants to ever win this pawn and stop it from being a threat. But notice that there's no entry point for his pawns are blocking all the entry points. The entry point is only on a4. He's going to have to get to a4. Rook's going to have to move to ever even take this pawn. Notice also, if you move rook from a4, we can always play a4. Threatening to get our pawn even more advanced. And notice if never going to be able to defend a1 as many times as we can with our bishop and rook. So this position is kind of a ticking time bomb. He has to defend against this pass pawn, but in the meantime, we attack on the other side of the board like this. Notice if we're able to play this move here, we're going to be threatening this pawn, and our king can start up and threaten this pawn. It's going to be devastating for our opponent. And notice our opponent's king is trying to enter. And I'm not really scared of this at all because I'm noticing that our opponent does not have any entry points at all. Entry points are completely minimal, and his pawn moves are not possible because a pawn, it's possible, but it's bad. And we can keep shouldering his king out. Notice this pawn is just going for us to take as well. King can't enter to any of these squares. Rook slides over, threatening to win a pawn, but we can advance our pawn here. And the next move is probably going to be a4. Alright, and our opponent is deciding he wants to try to trade pawns. Now we can take here, but that would weaken our pawns, and he go for something like this, trying to play off that file that's just opened. I don't really want to do that. I think more direct plan is to start advancing this pawn, force our opponent to respond. Take, so taken pawn. Right, and we're going to keep running our pawn up the board. We're going to give a check with this pawn here, now that the rook is off the file. And we're going to give another check here. We're going to keep running our pawn up the board. Opponent takes the pawn. You notice we can keep this check the rook. Alright, and we win the rook, and our opponent does not have very many moves. Now, one thing you want to be careful of is not allowing a stalemate. In addition, you want to make sure your opponent always has squares to move. Squares are going to be available after we promote to the queen here. Bishop's cutting off this square. This square is not available because of the pawn. just these two squares. So playing a move like rook over here would be a blunder because of it's restricting the only square that it has. So what we want to do here, first give a check, force the king to the open file here. Notice we're cutting off the king. Now we can deliver ladder mate on a8 with our rook. And that's checkmate. Alright guys, that was a very interesting game to start off our introduction to the Grunfeld. Grunfeld is my favorite opening of all time. I love playing the Grunfeld. And I'm going to show you some of the main variations here. Now our opponent started with this 3 knights variation. This is a different move order. Usually when you get the Grunfeld, your opponent is going to play d4, you play f6, or knight f6, your opponent's going to play c4, you play g6, and then they go for knight c3, and then you go for d5. So we get this, c4, g6, knight c3, and this is the traditional way to start the Grunfeld. There's a few different variations of the Grunfeld. The main one is called the exchange variation, which starts like this. They take, you take back, they play e4, you take, they take back, and then you play bishop to g6, and then there's a few different moves here. There's bishop c4 here, there's knight f3 here, there's knight e2 here, there's bishop e3. There's so many different variations of the Grunfeld here. There's also bishop e5 check here. But in most of the variations of the Grunfeld, the idea is you want to play c5 or e5, and you want to attack this d5 pawn or d4 pawn, make a lot of pressure on it with your fianchettoed bishop. And all your moves are going to sort of go off of that. So here your opponent plays knight f3, you're going to go for c5, trying to threaten. Notice your opponent is never going to take, because if they take, you win the bishop, or you win a pawn and you win the rook, because of the bishop being incredibly active on the diagonal. So they can never take in these positions, and you're never worried about this kind of capture. And yeah, you just play moves to threaten the center, and it's very fun to play because you get to attack immediately, and your opponent has to defend the center. Yes, they get more space, but their center can crumble very quickly, and you can start winning immediately. So, say for example, they play one wrong move here. Well, you're winning a tempo, and it's going to be amazing because you're going to play knight c6. This move is nice sometimes, but sometimes it's a little too slow. You can play queen a5 here. You can play castles and then rook to d8, creating more pressure on the file, pinning the pawn. So there's all sorts of attacking moves you can play, and it's a really fun opening to play when, especially when you win a tempo or you have an advantage in some way. So alright, our opponent does go with knight f3 though. This is a different variation of the Grunfeld called the 3 knights, and it can transpose into a bunch of different lines. But here we got d5 and very odd move e4 here. Now normally this is not what you're going to get, but our opponent did just fully blunder a pawn here, and it allowed us to simplify into a very strong position where we were up a piece eventually. So we won the pawn, we attacked his knight dropped back, hoping to win the pawn. We noticed that it blundered another pawn in the center, and we exchanged queens immediately, and got into this endgame where we're up a piece and a pawn, and it looks great for us here. Our knight is an incredible piece. Our bishop is an incredible piece too, restricting the development of these two. And here, all we have to do is develop our pieces actively onto nice squares, make sure everything's fine, and yeah, get our king out of the center of the board. So that's what we did. We developed our knight, then they pressured our knight, so we dropped ours back. We developed our bishop with an eye on simplification, and our opponent, rightfully so, decided to deny the simplification offer because he does not want to trade pieces when he's behind. It makes sense. We castled, and our opponent decided to knock our knight away with c5, but I noticed that when your pawn advances, you of course take control of some more squares, but you give up control of other squares. So now this d5 square is a prime square for our knight, and I immediately focused on getting our knight there. He knocked it away again, helping us go to the place we wanted to go to. And then we played knight to d5, creating pressure on this bishop. Now he has a choice. What is he going to do to defend this bishop? Now, one thing I've always noticed is that this bishop is an incredibly strong piece, so we want to win its counterpart, the dark squared bishop from white. And our opponent decided to let us do that, so we did. And we dropped our bishop back, and now 2 bishops, both creating immense pressure on pawns. I thought that b3 was going to be played, but our opponent was more focused on their kingside advances. And we saw an opportunity to pressure the knight. Sorry about that. Let me go back. We saw an opportunity to pressure the knight. Our opponent defends his knight, and we win a pawn, which is nice. Then we decide to start developing our rooks finally. We exchange pieces with another pawn. And here, yes, our pawn structure on the queen side is badly damaged, but we are up so much material, and we do have a passed pawn. So we've converted our position from one where we're up a piece and a pawn. Now we're up 3 pawns, and one of them is passed, which is excellent. We also have the capacity to make a pawn on the king side as well, because our opponent has 3 pawns here, and we have 4, which means we should be able to create a passed pawn in some way. That way we can start pushing our pawns on both sides of the board, forcing our opponent to respond. So it never comes to that, but that's always an opportunity you need to take note of. We decide to go for this rook exchange because we want to win the game quickly, and this is going to be the best way to do it. So we exchange rooks and start advancing our pawn over here. Our opponent blockades our pawn, and we decide now it's time to play on the king side. He's distracted all his pieces towards the queen side, and we advance our king to the center of the board. Restrict our opponent's rook. We allow him to take here, because taking for us would not be that good. I saw this move, and then I saw rook over, and these pawns are basically indefensible for us. He's going to be able to go num on all these pawns, and we are not going to be able to do anything. And he's going to have a pass pawn of his own. Where I noticed that if he takes us, which, like what happened in the game, this pawn is still blockading this one, so there's no pass pawn that he's ever going to gain. And for him to win this pawn, he's going to have to put his rook on one of these squares where our knight can take it, or our bishop can take it. So we're not really worried about pass pawn on this side of the board. We see this nice combination here with e4 and then moving our bishop. That way we can save the bishop and keep advancing. And here our opponent fails to see that this fork wins his rook. He thought that was a free pawn, but it's not. And then we see checkmate in 2 moves, and we play it. So overall, a very interesting game with an opening that not that many beginners play, but I feel like it appeals to a lot of people because it's very aggressive, and you get to put your opponent on shaky water. Nobody likes playing against the Grunfeld, and it's because you get attacked immediately as white, and white, when the opponent plays d4, all they want to do is squeeze you, play very positional moves. They don't want to attack you very much. They just want to slowly outplay you. But when you play the Grunfeld, you can quickly outplay your opponent and win the game in a matter of moves if they misstep. So that's why I like the opening, and I hope you guys enjoy it and maybe try it in some of your games. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. See ya.